Welcome back to your first coding challenge of this section. So now it's time to finally put everything that you learned in this section so far into practice. So in this section, I want you to use a constructor function in order to implement a very simple car. All right. So for this purpose, a car has just a make and a speed property. And the speed is simply the current speed of the car measured in kilometers per hour. Then I want you to implement an accelerate method that will increase the car's speed by 10, and it should also log the new speed to the console. Then another method called brake, which will then decrease the speed, but only by 5. All right. And finally, I want you to use this test data down here to implement these two cars. So basically to create two car objects and then experiment with calling the two methods that we just created on each of the objects. And of course, you should use all the knowledge from the previous lectures to doing this. So I hope that this is a fun challenge that's not too hard. So take all the time that you need, and I see you back here when you're ready with my solution. All right. So hopefully you did that successfully. So let's get started here. So we create the constructor function for car, and one more time with a capital C. And then we want each car object to have a make and a speed. And so that's the arguments that we're going to pass into this function. And then just as before, on the this property, we will set the make to the make that we receive and the speed to the speed that we receive as well. And so this is basically always going to work the same way. So as I mentioned, this is a pattern that developers came up with. And so now we just simply follow this like a recipe. All right. And with this, we can actually already create our two cars. So let's say the BMW is a new car. And so remember, this new operator here is what's going to enable all of this to work. And so here the make is of course BMW, and the speed is 120 kilometers per hour, which for my American friends is 75 miles per hour, I believe. So the next one is going to be the Mercedes. So that's new car, and at speed 95 kilometers per hour. Okay, so let's just take a look. And so yeah, that appears to be working just fine. And so now let's implement our two methods here. So accelerate and brake. And of course, we are not going to add the method right here. So we will not do this dot accelerate, because as we just learned before, that would be terrible for performance, especially if we had many car objects. So instead, we will of course make use of prototypal inheritance. So we take the prototype property of car, and to that we add the accelerate property. Accelerate, that's correct. And we make it a method by passing in a function, or actually by specifying a function here. So once again, we can use the this keyword in here because that is simply going to be the object on which the method will be called. And so that object will have the speed property. And so here we can then increase that by 10. And then we can also log that to the console. And we can even make use, of course, of the make. So this one wasn't specified in the text, but we can log a nice string like this is going at this dot speed, and then kilometers per hour. But again, this part you wouldn't have to implement like this. And now let's just take this here for the brake, because it's going to be pretty similar. So brake, And all we do then is to decrease the speed by 5. All right. And now let's just call this on the BMW a couple of times. So BMW.accelerate, and let's do that 3 times. And so after 3 times, the BMW is going at 150 kilometers per hour. So apparently that works just fine. Let's just add a brake here in the middle. And so now we reduce the speed a little bit and then back up to 145. Okay, and that's actually it. That's all we had to do in this challenge. And maybe with this example, you can start to see the advantages of object-oriented programming in action. So all the advantages that we talked about right in the first lecture of this section. And essentially the part where we learned that in object-oriented programming, we pack both the functionality and the data into objects. And so that's exactly what we have here. So each of these objects, so BMW and Mercedes, contains the state of the car, so the current speed and the make, and it also contains the functionality to manipulate its own data. So the accelerate and brake methods in this case are able to manipulate the speed, right? And at the same time, these two methods also form the public interface of this object, right? So right now the rest of our code can interact with these objects by calling the brake and the accelerate methods. Now in this case, of course, this is just a very small and isolated example, so it can still be hard to see the advantages of this, but maybe you can take a minute or two and compare this style of coding with the code that we have written up until this point in the course. All right, so at some point you will see that this is really a completely different way of thinking about our code. But anyway, that's it for this challenge. In the next video, we are going to talk about ES6 classes. So I hope to see you there soon.